Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Dear students, welcome back to our sessions with the subject Human Resource Management. Today is our final session for the subject in which we will discuss the managing global human resources. Now, as to that topic, which is one of the most important and sensitive topics that need to be discussed in this course, as we discussed the functions before, we will also talk about the functions of the human resource management in a global context. Now, we have the following objectives. List the human resource challenges of the international business. Illustrate how inter-country differences affect human resource management. Discuss the global differences and similarities in human resource practices. Explain 5 ways to improve international assignments through selection. And finally, discuss how to train and maintain international employees. As for that objectives, we have the following contents. Challenges of international businesses. Inter-country differences that affect human resource management. The global differences and similarities in human resource practices. International assignments through selection. Finally, training and maintaining the international employees. Now, as an introduction here, talking about the human resource management in a global context is not an easy issue. We have different factors that we have to take into consideration, besides the things that we have discussed before, as for the main functions, starting with planning for the human resource personnel, all the way up till we talked about training, maintaining the staff, and developing future plans for the human resource management. However, here we will talk about extra issues that should be considered as we talk about the human resource management in a global context. For example, coordinating market, product, and production plans on a worldwide basis. This is one of the things that can be a concern or a strategy at the level of the corporation. Now the question here, how the human resource function can help achieve these tasks. Creating organization structures capable of balancing centralized home office control with adequate local autonomy. Now, doing so requires some kind of tactics as for hiring, selection, policies, training, etc. Besides, extending the human resource policies and systems to surface staffing needs abroad. So here we will talk about the expats working outside the boundary of the country itself and what kind of needs do we have to address. Now here, deployment here is an easy or one of the topics that we have to consider, easily getting the right skills to where they are needed by the company, regardless of geographic location. Doing so requires a lot of planning as for the kind of competencies needed. First, competition requires some kind of selection as for the skills and competencies. Besides the needs of the expat in these locations, the cultural differences, and how to disseminate the information so that the company can somehow benefit from such kind of information in all its plans. So the second point here is about information, knowledge and innovation dissemination. Now spreading the state-of-the-art knowledge and practices through the organization regardless of their origin. Now this may imply the use of the human resource management system, okay, in a way that can help convey and communicate with all the plans, so in a way to disseminate this information to create extra values for companies based on the expertise and experiences they have in different countries. Identifying and developing talent on a global basis. Now here, identifying those who can function effectively in a global organization and developing their abilities. So these are examples of some of the challenges we have to tackle as we talk about the human resource management in a global context. Now, what are the inter-country differences that may affect human resource management? So we talk about staffing, or the staff that we have in one country, and we may move them to another country or vice versa. We can even get some to local or localized locations. We can also use individuals from third countries to work in the country itself. So there are a lot of issues we have to discuss as we talk about the differences among members in different countries. So for example here, we have the culture factors, culture for sure is one of the things that we have to address very carefully and seriously. So culture differs from one country to another, and this also should be one of the points that human resource management should study first, in a way to either blend with the culture that can help achieve the organization's objectives, avoid any clashes as for values, beliefs, so the kind of values that may not really affect the business itself, and the like. So people can be trained, can be somehow drilled in how to deal with cultural differences as they move from one place to another place. Economic systems also vary from one country to another, and accordingly the conditions of work may also vary. So here we consider things like the compensation system, wages, salaries, promotions, etc. Finally, the legal and the industrial relation factors. These are issues that can be different from one country to another. Legal system can affect the business policies in terms of hiring, the minimum wage rates in country to another country, etc. Besides industrial relation factors such as unions, syndicates, and the recognition of unions by governments in some countries can differ also. So these things should also be taken into consideration. Now the global differences and similarities in human resource practices. In this regards of the international context, we still have the same functions. But considering the geographic differences, culture, economic system, for example, we may have also some clashes here and there. But as for the functions, we can have similar or some similarities as for the policies and methodologies used. For example, the personnel selection procedure. Now, as we talk about hiring the right individual to work is actually based on the right job analysis. And accordingly, we come up with the job description and job specification as we discussed before. So this is to a great extent is similar to the one that we discussed before. However, the standards that we may put as for selection may vary according to the need, but the procedure will be almost the same. Now the use of pay incentives, of course motivation is almost the same. We have all the same needs. But the kind of differences we have in terms of needs and wants may be affected by these factors like the economic status, the level of income in the country where the company operates, and accordingly these issues should be taken into consideration as we design the compensation system. Training and development practices are among the functions that are somehow similar, but here we talk about training that can be very specific to the tasks, so this would be the same. We also have some kind of training to cope with the culture, to cope with different legal systems and culture differences in different countries. So similarities in terms of the goals as for the task and work achievement and progress, but we also may design special kind of training and development practice that can be affiliating with the culture differences, legal systems, for example, international businesses, etc. Now the purpose of the performance appraisal is almost the same here. In disregards of what has been done by the employee, at the end we would like to check upon the performance of the employee and to make sure that what he or she does meets the standards before, and that can help the company achieve its own organizations through the individuals. So the purpose of the performance appraisal for the company is the same as that in the local company, and it is somehow similar to the employee as for the promotion, career, rewards, etc. So the purpose of performance appraisal is said to be almost similar as for the purpose. Now the way it is done can be a little bit different according to the nature of culture in some places, the way interviews are handled, and these some kind of technical issues should be taken into consideration. Now, how to implement a global human resource system? Now, the best practice for developing and implementing a more effective global system here, maybe first a global human resource network is needed. So that will make local human resource managers a part of the global teams. Information flow will be easier, and this information of high value will be disseminated among human resource specialists in different places. Replace that it is more important to standardize. Remember here, it is very important to standardize ends and competencies that we do with specific methods. So we say here cultures, economic issues, legal system, income, etc. are all factors that can be different from one place to another. And in disregards of the methods, these things are addressed. The ends are actually the main goals of the human resource practices. So that is why, in a way to design a more effective global human resource system, we have to consider more on the ends, to put more value on the ends than we do with the methods that can be different. Number 3 here, we have to dedicate adequate resources to the global human resource effort. Now, the amount of work, the pressure here, the stress, challenges can be different from one place to another. Training requirements can also be different. So resources needed to cope with such kind of differences will be very important. Now, these are examples of the best global human resource practices. For example, do and don't. For the do here, work within existing local systems, integrate global tools into local systems. On the other hand, try to do everything the same way everywhere. This is wrong because things are different. We said before that maybe the values and the opinions of the people around the business, stakeholders, can also be affected by the way the business is managed. So do here, create a strong corporate culture, but do not yield to every claim that we are different. So create a global network for system development. Global input is critical. On the other hand, do not force a global system on local people. So this can be done systematically and according to the changes, considering the change agent and why people are resisting such kind of differences as for the system. So it can be imposed to the local people because of the dramatic consequences of such practice. Now, treat local people as equal partners in system development. Now, talking about system development, we're talking about the doers. So the one who should apply and develop such kind of system should all be treated equally. But do not use the local people just for implementation without getting them involved in the decision-making process and development system. Now, staffing the global organization. Now, talking about staffing here, we may have some kind of differences as to the need, capacity, financial capacity of the company itself, the requirements, the competencies needed. So here, international staffing, home or local, is a decision that is to be made. So we have expats, expatriates, home country nationals, and third country nationals. Now, the home country nationals, as for example, as the name suggests, those are local staff working in the same country where the company operates. Expat are actually employees from a third country, from a second country, working in the home country. Like, for example, a Yemeni company that operates in another country, or a Chinese company that operates in Yemen. The staff from China would be considered to be expat. A third country national are the employees working in a company who are not from the home country, home company nationality. For example, a company that works in Yemen, okay, a Chinese company working in Yemen, but the employees are from Japan, are from Australia, Canada, India. So those employees are third country nationals. Now, what could be the reason we hire third country nationals? Sometimes it can be the capacity, the capability, some kind of competencies that cannot be found in the parent country or the second country, for example. Sometimes can be the cost, availability of the workers, etc. So there are so many issues here, some of which may consider the control, desire to control the company itself. So that's why we have home country nationals. Some of which can also be economic oriented. And then we have offshoring, having local employees abroad do jobs that the firm's domestic employees previously did in-house, which is another way we can do staffing in a global organization. But as talking about offshoring issues, we have to consider the following points. For example, effective local supervisor or management structure, Screening and required training for locals so that they can adapt with the new task and the new environment. Culture differences in hiring practices should also be addressed. Maybe orientation training can be offered. Local compensation policies and working conditions that can be different should be adjusted to the place and economic system of the country itself. Now here, an example, Egypt was ranked 4th in the world and always considered as an ideal location because of its low wage rates and quality workforce. Now here we have different considerations as to talk about international staffing policies. Now these can be directly affected by the top management values. For example, ethnocentric, polycentric, and geocentric. There's a tendency from the top management to hire people from the same country. So this is referred to as ethnocentric. Now this tendency is based on the desire to control the company itself, especially in high-ranking position like top management in the company itself. Polycentric here, the desire of the company to go global. So they may develop such kind of structure in which they allow people from the host country to work in a company, especially the managerial position. So if a Chinese company, for example, works in Yemen, so they may allow Yemenis to work in different sections in this company. So this is referred to as polycentric. Finally, we have the geocentric here. Now, the tendency of the top management to adopt such kind of staffing policy here is to go internationalize or to go international. Internationalizing the human resource screening and recruiting process requires the company to hire, select people from different places in disregard of their origin. So it is based on the geographic area rather than on host or home country. So this is referred to as geocentric. Good example of companies that adopt this system is Siemens. Siemens has over 150 plants around the world. So based on the huge infrastructure the company has, they have to adopt the geocentric kind of policy. Now, talking about expatriate assignments, there is always this question, why expatriate assignments fail? We said that expat work can be very difficult to cope with, not for the sake of the task itself. The reason why a task can be difficult is something that can be addressed easily. There are a lot of factors why expatriate assignments fail. We will discuss some of these issues here as we talk about the global organizations. For example, the first one, personality. Now, this is one of the factors that has got nothing to do with the task itself. Rather, it's about the doer, the traits and the characteristics of the person who might be sent to do the job outside, may not really be good enough to cope with the challenges internationally. So personal intention can be another reason why expat assignments fail. Family pressure, especially big number or a big family, for example, kids issues, family issues, so they may not be able to live and carry on the living outside. Inability of spouse to adjust the new life can cause problem, and that may distract the expat to do the job. Inability to cope with overseas responsibilities. Now the level of difficulties, new tasks, new relations, these are issues that can hinder the success of the task. And finally, the lack of cultural skill. Now these skills are very important to blend in the culture, the new culture, so that they can cope, they can do the job properly without any problems. Now, how do we help expatriate assignments succeed in order to overcome the problems that we discussed before and help the expatriates here or expat do the job properly? We need to consider the following. Realistic review should be considered, careful screening, improved orientation at the very beginning. Even the screening, as we talked before, selection should be based on the factors that we may think can affect somehow the job. So as we screen and select, we have only to select those who can be good enough, capable to cope with the cultural differences, and capable to do the task in different contexts, and also the family issues can be somehow still controlled. Culture and language training is one of the things that can help in succeeding the task. So that's why training programs are actually designed and developed before the expat is sent. And finally, improved benefits and packages. So these kind of benefits and packages should be developed and designed and discussed before the expat departure to the country. Now, selecting the expatriate managers. We have different issues here. For example, adaptability screening here. Assessing the assignees and spouses' probable success in handling the foreign transfer. Now, talking about this issue, we talk about a lot of factors. For example, here we need to talk about family issues, kids issues, the study, the adaptation to the new system, for example, capability of blending in the new culture. So these are issues we have to discuss as we screen. Overseas assignment inventory. A test that identifies the characteristics and the attitudes international assignment candidates should have. So in this regards of the place, we have to consider the different characteristics needed and also the attitudes of the individuals toward these places. So positive attitudes should be developed and should only be screened so that to make sure that the work will be achieved. And then we have the realistic reviews, the problems to expect in the new job, as well as the culture benefits, problems, and also other issues affiliating with the country, economic system, legal system, politics, etc. So these things should all be discussed, and maybe a training sessions or workshops can help in defining these issues. Orientation and training is one of the most important things we have to consider as we talk about human resource, international human resource management. Now, training is needed on the following issues. The impact of cultural differences on business outcomes. So, as we talk about the operations, promotions, the designing, the packaging of the products, the services, the way it is offered, all these things should somehow be linked to whatsoever differences in culture and to what extent such kind of differences can affect this business outcomes. So this may differ in terms of the program content. In this regards of the individuals here, we have to consider the differences of culture that may have a direct impact on the outcomes. So a lot of companies usually design such kind of training programs before traveling so that they can somehow discuss and tackle all these issues. Number two, how attitudes, whether negative or positive, are formed and how they influence behavior. Now, as we talk about attitudes here, attitudes is easier as we change regarding changing, then we talk about values. Attitudes can be a result of past experiences, or it can be a result of wrong information. So maybe negative attitudes about a country, working in a given country, can be wrong. So that's why training can help build positive attitudes, which really can help influence behavior. One of the negative attitudes of people is that being afraid of working in a different culture with my family, for example. So as they think about that, so thinking about the family issues, it can be one of the attitudes that can be somehow amended through training. So developing training programs that can help cope with these differences as for the family needs and the new culture set will be very helpful. Factual knowledge about the target country. This is an informative training program in which they offer information about the economy, the culture, the legal system, the political system, stability, etc. Language adjustment and adaptation skills can also be very important content in any training course. Now in today's business, we have current trends as for the expatriate training. These are examples. classroom programs, providing overseas executive with educational opportunities similar to statewide programs. Now, these real-life kind of programs can help study further issues about the targeted country, continuing in country cross-culture training, which may take time but very helpful. The use of returning managers as resources to cultivate the global mindsets of their home office staff. Now, these are exemplaries that can set good examples of success outside and have high credibility among the employees. So that is why it is currently used by a lot of companies. Finally, the use of software and the internet for cross-culture training. Now, at the end, talking about the compensation system, we have here the balance sheet approach, which is one of the approaches used by different companies here. They define different factors that can help design the right compensation system. For example, home country groups of expenses like income taxes, housing, goods and services, and what is left is the discretionary expenses. Now, these are the elements that should be taken into consideration as we design the compensation system. Besides here, the employer estimates what each of these four expenses is the expat's home country and what each will be in the host country. Now, such a gap or difference is of paramount importance. The employer then pays any differences, such as additional income taxes or housing expenses. And this should be known that different may vary as for the taxes and housing expenses. In Europe, in the United States, and even within the same country, there can be differences in the capital, for example, or in different cities. So here, foreign service premium, these are examples of the incentives for international assignments. Remember, these can be good motivators to carry on the job in a very difficult new environment. So that is why we had to discuss these issues. One of the incentives here is the foreign service premium, financial payments above regular base pay. And this is typically ranged between 10% and 30% of base pay. And this also can be different from one position to another. Hardship allowances, now these allowances are given to the task difficulties, or the level of the task difficulties, payments to compensate expat for exceptionally hard living and working conditions in these countries. Mobility premiums here, the lump sum payments to reward the employees for moving from one assignment to another. Now, this is more based on the geographic kind of movements. Now, one issue about global human resource management here is how to appraise staff outside or expat people, expat employees. Challenges here, determining who should appraise the manager and based on what factors is one of the factors or challenges that face human resource management. So this can be discussed by the top management, the one who may handle the appraising, and the host country, for example, or the parent country, as for the people coming from different countries, should be always the direct supervisor. But besides these issues, we have also to consider the differences in the way questions should be put, interviews, the context of the interviews, which can be the result of the appraisal, should also be designed to fit the culture or to fit the procedures that are followed by similar companies in that country. Furthermore, legal issues should also be discussed here, as the legal system can also be different from one place to another. Improving the expat appraisal process, we may need to specify and consider the assignment's difficulty level. So it's not just about doing the task, so the task can be somehow further developed in different countries, can be more difficult to do as for the culture, the people the people that the expat should deal with. So that is why difficulty level of the assignments should be considered in the appraisal process. We also weigh evaluation more toward on-site managers' appraisal than toward the home site managers. Now, this kind of direct contact can help come up with the right and accurate kind of appraisal. Use a former expat from the same overseas location for advice when possible. Now, this advice can be very precious, very valuable, especially as we talk about the outcome of the appraisal, what should be given as for rewards, the promotion. So these issues can be really important to take the right decision. Now, labor relation is another factor here in human resource management, international context. We know that unions, federal unions and confederal unions can be found in different countries. The characteristics of European labor relations, for example here, which can be a little bit different than that in, for example, the United States, which is less tensed. For example, industry-wide centralization in Europe. Multiple union recognition is found. That is why we have federal unions and confederal unions. And the content and the scope of bargaining can also be more intensive and more persevering, more demanding, together with building good relation with all the industrial relations stakeholders, including the government. So that's why we always hear about issues affiliating with the labor relations, industrial relations in Europe, more than those in the Middle East or even in the United States. Now, another issue here, we have possibilities of sending our workers to different places. Problems can happen, and that is why we need to discuss safety, terrorism, and the global human resource management. So taking protective measures, for example, crisis management teams should be developed to address these problems, should they happen, of course. One of the problems that may happen is kidnapping and ransom insurance. So this insurance should be developed from the very beginning, especially if the location of the business where we're heading is somehow not stable. Like places in Africa, a lot of countries invest a lot in Africa, but they have to consider this issue. Crisis situation, kidnapping, the employee is a hostage and the employee pays a ransom. Extortion here, threatening violence, which is another challenge. Threats to property or products unless the employer makes a payment. Maybe detaining materials, heavy machineries can also be part of this problem, which needs to be handled by the insurance developed before. Repatriation here, the people coming back from those countries to the home country, problems and solutions. The problem here, making sure that the expatriate and his or her family do not feel that the company has left them adrift. So the position that they come to is not of high caliber. The financial situation will not fit them as to what they used to have in the country where they come from. So these issues should be discussed in the human resource policy system. Solutions here, we need to make sure that the employee always feels in the loop with what is happening back at the home office. So a continuous kind of communication can help. Provide formal repatriation services when the expat returns home. So this should be adhered to the system adopted by the human resource management. So expat will have no worries about this issue. So by this, dear students, we come to the end of our session. In our session here, we talked about the human resource challenges of the international business, inter-country differences that may affect human resource management. We also discussed the global differences and similarities in human resource practices and functions. We explained 5 ways to improve the international assignments through selection. And finally, we discussed how to train, maintain international employees. You will have an assignment number 12 together with this session. By this, we come to the end of this session and to the end of this program. So thank you very much for listening. I really thank and appreciate all the students attending these courses. I wish you all the best in the course of your life and the study. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.